What's inside the box today? It's two items that may or may not be linked conceptually together. Let's see how I can grab this here. There we go. One of these is a script portion that I wrote many years ago, and also some 16 millimeter film that has left a stain on the script. So let's get these things straightened up here, and I'll tell you a little bit about the stories behind these items so that they are preserved and do not disappear when I do. First of all, let's start with the film. Back in the old days, before I had children, I was a film editor primarily by trade, later to become a writer and director and producer, and even to direct and co-produce two feature-length films before I was 30, although they never went anywhere or did anything. One was called The Strangeness, and the other was called Brothers of the Wilderness, if you want to look them up. Anyway, The Strangeness has kind of a cult following. It was made in 1979, but released in 80, and they call it a 1980s horror film cult classic. Anyway, there's even been a DVD of that, Blu-ray, I think now, that has interviews with us all, 30-year retrospective that we did a number of years ago because it was made in 1979, released in 1980. Anyway, so this is what I used to make my living as. When my first child, my son, was born, I was living in an apartment. We were living in an apartment, and the bedroom where he slept was my editing room, 16 millimeters. I don't know how I got into that. I guess it's because my first job was with a producer in Burbank, Richard J. Soltis Productions. He made industrial films. I had to quit school to support my family. I was at USC and my dad was paying all the bills, but I couldn't afford to pay for my share of the apartment, and Mary was working and everything, so we were kind of in dire straits. So I quit school and I went to work for Richard J. Soltis and did industrial films for a while. And eventually I got to be an editor for him. It was just him and an assistant, and I was kind of the gopher and then became the editor. Anyway, as you see here, there's a roll that you can kind of see through. Let's see, there we go. If you do it just right here, well, okay, the camera won't do it, but you can see through this because it's just the regular old celluloid film, and it's a negative. Okay, of that much we are certain. Are we bored yet? Let's see, there it is, negative, and you can see the negative image, but I have no idea what it's of. Often we would use negative and other kinds of footage to fill in when we made magnetic recordings on magnetic film. In those days there was no video, and so you would shoot film and you would take the sound that you had recorded on a tape recorder and put it onto a magnetically striped film coated with, like a tape recorder, coated with magnetic film. And then you would put that into what's called an interlock device of some sort, or a sync block. And that was something that had sprockets on like 3 or 4 gangs, and you could put the roll of film and lock it in sync with the picture, frame for frame, and then you could roll through and mark your edits, make them, and then run it through the block again to see how it worked. You had to have a separate viewer off to the side to see how it actually looked for your edits, all done manually. It required some skill. Anyway, this may have been that, or it may be a piece of negative from one of my features. This one would probably be from The Strangeness, but the end, where all the writing was that said what it was, has been ripped off. Anyway, remember, the point here is not just the items. The point is the stories behind the items, and you just heard a few. Since I spend a lot of time in film, you'll hear a few more in the future. But if you're brave enough to come back and look at other things. But let's look at this other item here. This is a script. It's a script that's from a film I made for Health called Cincinnati Bones and the Treasure of Health. Obviously influenced by, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Interestingly enough, to make it authentic, this was narrated. See the voiceover? Suddenly a booming voice filled the chamber. Well, I wrote this script, and the company I did it for hired Harrison Ford's brother Terrence Ford, who looked a little like him but sounded exactly like him, to come in and narrate it, so that when we saw Cincinnati Bones on screen, we heard what sounded like Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones doing the voiceover. Okay, so there's this voice from they have the stomach room and the heart room and the brain room. We built these incredible miniature sets. There's things bubbling and boiling in the stomach, and the brain has these weird electrical signals. For its day and age, which is in the 1980s, it was amazing special effects for an educational film, but this was one of the largest educational film companies. And my friend Mark, he actually brought in, along with his wife Junie, they had access to some of the first green screen machines for doing mats. So we were able to do live video from this script, shoot it with mats integrated immediately behind the scenes so we could see what was going on with the miniatures we'd shot and how the live action. Now, I actually starred in this too, so I wrote it, produced it, directed it, starred in it, and did everything on that one. The guy who was the main producer for the company, well, he had decided this was the idea that he was going to use as a way of jumping ship from working for an educational film company, so he gave this an enormous budget to make a film on this topic, and then it turns out that he didn't have time to do it, and the film had to be made. So I inherited that great budget, which at the time was like $25,000 for a 15-minute educational film. Huge amount. My feature, The Strangeness, was made for $25,000 at nearly the same time. So anyway, this is the script. This is what we did. And I'm running out of time here. Only about 10 seconds left on the memory. So I'll have to catch you next time for the next thing that's inside the box.